For anyone just joining us, we're just asking you to use the QR code on the screen or the link in the chat pane to do a wee activity around stereotypes, just thinking about 3 words you would commonly associate with girls and 3 words that you would commonly associate with boys, just to explore stereotyping a wee bit to start, and we'll revisit this as we're going. I'll just continue chatting through the sort of introductory slides as you're doing that. So my name's Hannah Brown. I'm going to be doing the first part of the session today, and I'm joined by my colleague Amy Johnson. And in the session today, we're going to be exploring some of the resources in the new Inclusion, Wellbeing and Equalities framework. So just some protocols before we start today, and please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat pane as we're starting out, so you can pop your name and your organisation in there. And you can keep your camera on today, but please just make sure that you're muted unless you're joining in the conversation at any point. And you can use the chat pane, or you can pop your hand up throughout the session for any questions, comments or resources. And just to make you aware as well that we do have closed captions available. If you're not familiar with Teams, you'll see at the top of the top bar, there's 3 buttons that says more. If you click on that and scroll down, that gives you the options to turn on closed captions. They're not massively accurate, but they can be quite helpful. And just to make you aware, we will be using Mentimeter and chat pane for activities, and the session is going to be recorded today. So just a reminder again that if you don't want your face on the camera, just pop your camera off. So just before we begin the session today, I would just like to start by sharing our Safer Space slide. So today we'll be talking a lot about inequality and some of the related issues such as stereotypes, discrimination and our own unconscious and conscious bias and gender-based violence. And some of these topics can be really challenging to talk about and to think about, so it's important for us to try and ensure that this feels as safe a space as possible. So we've set up this wee sort of group agreement here, but if there's anything that you would like to add to that, please feel free to share your ideas in the chat pane. So as I just mentioned before, in the session today, we will be talking a wee bit about gender stereotypes and gender roles for the purpose of particular activities, and we will be using quite binary language when we're doing this. So I just asked you to do the Menti activity, which looks at words that we would commonly associate with boys and girls. So this is really to highlight that gender is not binary, exists on a spectrum, but we use this language for these particular activities to explore the binary nature of the stereotypes themselves. Whenever we're talking about an aspect of equalities, we aim to be intersectional in our approach. It's important when thinking about removing barriers for children that we are aware of how barriers might intersect for children who face multiple forms of inequality. And as I mentioned previously, we will be talking about some sensitive issues. So if you require any support, please feel free to reach out to either the CLT team or myself or Amy at the end, and we can signpost you on to the appropriate organisation. And just finally, a reminder that everyone is on their own journey in relation to equalities work. So please be non-judgmental of others in conversation, but also in discussions, be mindful that people in the room might have lived experiences of some of the issues that we're talking about today. So just being sensitive to that as well. So our objectives for the session today, we've taken 4 of the informed level equality resources from the Inclusion, Wellbeing and Equalities Professional Learning Framework, and we've condensed them into one session today. So it's going to be a really, really packed session today. And it's just to give you an overview of the 4 themes within that framework. And the full slide deck can be found on the framework page on the Education Scotland website, and we'll share the link to this after the session. But just to kind of let you know what to look for once you access that page. So when you go onto that link, you'll see that there's a kind of introductory page, and then there's 3 levels listed there. So the informed level is the only level that has any resources in it at the moment, and that's the level that we're coming in at today. This is kind of just introducing some of the themes related to equalities, and it's the only one that you can click on at the moment. So once you click on the informed bit, it'll take you to this page, and you'll see there are 4 sections. So inclusion, rights and equality, relationships, wellbeing and care. Obviously, feel free to explore any of these themes, but we are focusing on the rights and equalities theme today. And then within that, you'll see that there's all the PowerPoints in here that you can access, and facilitation and information notes as well. And these slides can be used to facilitate professional learning in a group or a whole setting, or as self-directed learning activity just as an individual. So the facilitation notes are included separately, but they're also on the bottom of each of the slides. And we do ask that when you're using the notes that you don't change any of the slides, but you're welcome to add slides or activities relevant to your own setting to support discussion and exploration of the topic. Facilitators know their participants the best, so feel free to add things that you think will help to kind of further that discussion. And anyone that works in a CLD or education setting more broadly can be a facilitator and use these slides and deliver to other members of staff. And we're still looking for feedback on the resources, so we'll share a link to submit your feedback at the end, and we'll share this via email as well. So if you use any of the slide decks in your own setting, please consider providing feedback on how we can improve the resources. And just linking to the CLD professional standards and the relevance of equalities work within CLD. CLD as a profession has a value-based concern with inclusive practice, and the quality improvement framework illustrates standards for improving equality, diversity and inclusion. And just to make you aware that we've recently achieved the CLD standard mark, which means that participating in this training can be recorded of 1.5 hours of professional learning time. And this can contribute to the 35 hours per year pro rata required for membership of the CLD Standard Council. So just to get started then, so for the first few slides, we're going to be exploring the theme of bias and inequality. So thinking about what these concepts mean and the relationship between them and considering how to challenge our own biases. So I'm just going to revisit the activity that I shared at the start. So I'll reshare the link for anyone that couldn't access it. So if you haven't done it already, can I ask you to go into the Menti there and just pop into the 2 slides 3 words that you would commonly associate with boys and 3 words that you would commonly associate with girls. I'm just going to pause for a wee minute to allow you to do that, and then we'll have a look at the results.
Hi, Hannah. Mine was saying that the slide for the girls bit hadn't moved on yet, but I don't know if that's just mine.
Yeah, sometimes Menti can be a wee bit kind of snaggy like that, and if I don't move on to the girls slide, then it gets stuck on the boys. So I've moved on to it now. So if anybody that couldn't get onto the girls slide before, if you try now, it's hopefully moved on. But let me know if it hasn't. Still not working. Has anyone managed to get onto the girls' slide at all? No?
Hey Hannah, I when I refreshed the browser, like just did a refresh, it moved on. So it kind of, I think it just wanted to catch up. If that works for anybody, let us know.
Thanks, Amy. If it's still not working for people, I'd just invite you to share your ideas in the chat pane if you're feeling comfortable doing that. I'll give it another minute and see if any of the... I'll try and refresh on my page as well. There's definitely something that I could probably be doing my end that I've maybe not done that allows people to move on their own on the slides or something, but...
I think there's maybe something, Hannah, if you press that blue present box in the top corner and then move on, then sometimes that makes a difference, but sometimes it doesn't.
Okay, I've tried that then. Give it one more minute, and then if it's still not working, we'll just that's it working now. Okay, thanks, Julie. Thank you.
That's okay. Just likes to throw us a different thing every day.
I know, there's always
just
something.
to check
Yeah.
we're paying attention. That's great. People are managing now. Brilliant.
So I've just shared that on the screen. Hopefully everybody can see it. So we can see the word cloud starting to generate now. So if you finish typing your words in, I'm just going to ask you to have a look at the word clouds on the screen and just share your observation. What are the sort of key differences that you're seeing in the word cloud for the boys versus the word cloud for the girls? So you can either just come in and chat if you're feeling comfortable to do that, or you can share your thoughts in the chat pane. I'll just keep flicking between the two slides. Thanks, Melissa. I think that is probably the first thing that jumps out, that there are a lot more sort of words with negative connotations for the boys. Any other patterns or key differences that people are noticing looking at the clouds? Yeah, thank you, Pauline. There are some conflicting words on the boys' cloud, quite critical, permissive. Yeah, absolutely, and physical attributes for the boys as well. Yeah, and we're seeing all the sort of well-known stereotypes popping up. Pretty is the biggest word, so for anyone that hasn't used Menti before, the bigger words are the words that more people have put in. So that's maybe the first thing that's come to mind. Is there anything else that people are noticing about the girls' cloud? Yeah, very appearance-centric for the girls, absolutely. And softer attributes as well. Great. I'm just going to stop sharing just now then. Thank you for doing that activity and for sharing your thoughts on it, and feel free to share any other thoughts as we're going along. Just checking that that's the slides back up now.
Yeah, that's good to me, Hannah.
Thank you. So just to kind of build on this idea of stereotypes then, this slide here shows another activity that we did with another group of people, asking them to do the same thing, and it's two word clouds generated, the boys at the left and the girls on the bottom right. And again, you'll see the same sort of patterns emerging here. So the boys word cloud has words that focus on physicality, strength, activeness, assertiveness, competitiveness, whereas the word cloud for the girls has words that focus on compliance, more sort of passive behaviours, appearance and nurturing behaviours. So the reason that we do this activity as a sort of introductory one is that it's important to know what the stereotypes are so that we can become aware of them, and then we can start to dismantle them. And just to clarify that the definition of a stereotype is a widely held belief or generalization about the behaviours, characteristics and roles performed by a specific group. So, for example, women and men for these gender stereotypes here. And gender stereotypes reinforce the idea of gender being binary and fixed, when most people will possess a mixture of the traits above, regardless of gender. However, these stereotypes are so entrenched in our societal narrative that we will likely have biases that have been influenced by them, often without us even realising. So I wanted to start this exploration looking at gender. However, it's important to consider how these stereotypes can intersect with other characteristics. Sometimes they are minimised or conversely accentuated when layered with racial stereotypes, homophobic or transphobic stereotypes, or ableist ideas. So just to kind of, before we explore bias, I just want to talk a wee bit about the sort of theme of diversity, because I think it's quite useful to have an understanding of what we mean by diversity before we continue. So we often hear these words kind of bandied around talking about diversity and talking about diverse people. But I just wanted to see what your understanding was of diversity. When you see these words written down or you hear them, what's your interpretation of the word diversity? So if you're happy to share even just a few words to kind of sort of give your definition in the chat pane just now, that'd be great. I'll just give you a wee minute to do that. Some great sort of definitions in the chat pane there. So we've got a wide variety of people, lived experiences, not everyone is the same, different points of view and life experiences, mixture of people representation reflective of the society we live in, yeah. And presenting as you feel you want the world to see you, yeah. Yeah, so there's lots of kind of different ideas and interpretations of diversity there, but all within the same theme. And I think they're all correct. It is quite a sort of broad term that can encompass a lot of different understandings. So when exploring this concept of diversity, whether it's about embedding it in the curriculum, increasing diversity in the workforce, or ensuring diversity is valued and not the cause of discrimination, it's worth considering this diagram on the screen here, illustrating some of the features of diversity. So you'll see the different types of diversity illustrated on the diagram. So we've got linguistic, we've got religious belief, we've got ethnic, cultural, racial, gender, sex, sexual orientation, family, age, neurodiversity, disability, and socioeconomic. For each feature of diversity, there are different groups of people to keep in mind. So for example, diversity of family can include care experienced learners, young carers, LGBT+ families, lone parent families, religious and cultural diversity in families, and more. Challenges and discrimination experienced by these groups can include, for example, homophobia, racism, anti-Semitism, and isolation. So the features of diversity represented on the diagram have been inspired by the protected characteristics in the Equality Act and the non-protected characteristics that are most relevant in the context of Scottish education and groups that are protected under the Education Additional Support for Learning Act. When we take a different look at different features of diversity, it's important to remember that the groups of people and issues mentioned are not exhaustive. It's also worth bearing in mind that diverse people are not homogenous. We all hold unique identities and strengths, and we should not be viewed through a lens of deficit. So going on now to talk a wee bit about gender stereotypes and unconscious bias. We began to unpick previously some of the stereotypes that underpin or act as a foundation for unconscious and conscious bias. And they create expectations which we unknowingly project onto others. So stereotypes lead to bias, which in turn reinforces the stereotypes. So I've got another wee sort of activity to explore this idea with you. So if you've got a piece of paper or you can use your phone, I would just like you to write down the names of 6 people that you trust, and within this don't include family members. So I'll just give you a minute to do that. And then once you've got your 6 people, for each person that you've listed, I'd just like you to expand on the information to include some additional characteristics. You might not know all of them about these people. So age, gender, ethnic origin, education, disability, and sexual orientation. So I'm not going to ask you to share these details with anyone. Obviously, this is just for your own reflection. But I'll give you a minute to do that, and then we can sort of chat about that. So as I said, I won't ask you to share those details with anyone, but I do invite you to reflect, if you want to, on the 6 people and how diverse your inner circle is. If you want to share any general reflections in the chat pane, or if you want to come in and just share your sort of thoughts verbally, you can do that as well. And really the purpose of this is to think about our sort of inner circles and who we spend our time with. And there will be variation in answers, but generally we find that people's inner circle consists of people that are like them. So, for example, of a similar age, educational background, or ethnic origin. And this commonness and familiarity provides comfort, and this in turn can skew our perception of others that feel less familiar to us. So this is just a reflective exercise which you can do with your groups as well. And as I said, you feel free to come in and share your reflections here. Otherwise, you're welcome to just keep them private. And I'll just move on, but if you do have any kind of thoughts, as I said, pop your hand up or pop them in the chat pane. So when thinking about this concept of bias, it is useful to consider both unconscious, or sometimes known as implicit bias, and conscious bias. So we all possess unconscious bias, but it's also likely that many of us will have more conscious forms of bias too. So it's important firstly to consider the function of unconscious bias. So our mind uses a dual processing system because we have to process so much information that our conscious mind can't keep up. So our conscious mind works more slowly and is responsible for more rational and sort of considered thinking. However, to function efficiently, our unconscious mind processes a lot more information for us and helps us to make snap decisions or inform our actions in certain situations. For example, when playing sports or when driving our cars. So it can help us make these decisions through using our experiences and identifying patterns to predict the correct course of action. Unfortunately, experiences are often informed by societal stereotypes, and so decisions based on these experiences can be harmful to the people or the group that the stereotype is held about. So when we're unaware of it, our unconscious bias often happens automatically. It can be in direct opposition to a person's values or beliefs. And our unconscious bias is often wrong, and if unchecked can lead to prejudice. And whilst we can't get rid of it, there are ways we can try to mitigate it. And one of these is trying to be aware of when you might have made a decision that's been influenced by your unconscious bias and where that unconscious bias has come from, which is where the last activity comes in. So our unconscious bias is shaped by our experiences, our sort of exposure to different people in the world, and what we've seen in sort of media and social media as well. It's also more likely to come into play when we are feeling really stressed, when we're under pressure, when we have multiple decisions to make, or when we're feeling threatened. That's when that kind of more rational, considered part of our brain is less likely to help us make decisions. So thoughts will enter our heads automatically as a result of years of social conditioning from the media or our experiences, for example. But what is important is that we recognise that this may constitute bias and consider whether it is influencing our perceptions, the interactions that we're having, and then our subsequent actions as well. On the other hand, conscious bias is a reflection of a person's feelings, values and belief systems, and it involves active discrimination, exclusion or harm to another person or a group of people. Conscious bias can be informed by the belief systems that we adhere to, so it can be helpful to examine these belief systems and cultural values and consider whether they've been informed by a wider system of prejudice or whether they benefit from this prejudice. So the only way that we can challenge our own biases is by becoming aware of what they are first, and then giving ourselves time to reflect and think about how we can change our actions moving forward. That's the end of this wee section here. I'm just having a look at some of the reflections in the chat pane. So we're seeing some kind of sort of similarities within the groups. Thanks for sharing that as well, really appreciate it. I'm just going to pass on to Amy for the next bit.
Thanks, Hannah. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm going to quickly talk through the impact of inequality resource that we've got. It's quite a short wee sort of snapshot, I suppose, of the impact of inequality. You know, I think probably you could go much further with some of this, but we'll keep this bit brief before I hand back to Hannah, who will then talk about the talking about diversity section. And as I go through, if anybody's got any questions, like Hannah said, or wants to make any comments or suggestions or share thoughts or ideas, either just pop it in the chat pane or use the hands up function and jump in. And I should say, unfortunately, this bit's not quite as interactive as the bit that Hannah just did. So you'll be listening to me talk at you a wee bit more. So apologies in advance for that. So this section of the Inclusion, Wellbeing and Equality Professional Learning resource aims to provide users the opportunity to explore what impact different forms of inequality can have on individuals who experience them, and then consider how these barriers may present themselves in education as well. Thanks, Hannah. So the image on the slide there shows the Allport scale, which was created by Gordon Allport after the Second World War to show how antilocution or negative speech and propaganda can pave the way for societal violence, and in the case of World War II genocide. But it can be adapted to explore the impact of all forms of inequality. So if we consider the theme that Hannah set for us earlier when we used the Menti and we're exploring gender inequality, gender stereotypes as an example. The Allport scale can display how everyday gender stereotypes build towards societal violence and create sort of platforms for or excuses for it as well. And this lays the foundation for discrimination and harmful behaviours, both on a sort of individual interpersonal level, but also on a wider societal level. So the behaviours at the bottom of the pyramid provide a strong foundation for the behaviours at the top of the pyramid, and allow for the progression through those stages as well. And one of the most effective ways to prevent the impact of that inequality, so for example, thinking about gender-based violence, is through early intervention and disrupting and challenging the low-level language or stereotypes or behaviours that we see at the bottom. And that's stuff that I think can be really easily potentially brushed aside as you know, a joke, or, you know, well, I didn't mean it like that kind of thing. But if we're kind of consistently trying to, in our sort of daily work, think about how that might be providing an option for excuses or the progression through the stages of the Allport scale that go towards more extreme behaviours, it can be a really helpful way to begin to think that we can do something around challenging inequality, which can sometimes feel like a really hard and massive task. And you can see as well the way that newspapers or perhaps certain policies and strategies and the way that certain groups are talked about in the media really fit into that antilocution and then that avoidance and then that discrimination part of the Allport scale. It's a really helpful way to sort of begin to break down why that bottom level stuff can be so damaging. Thank you, Hannah. So these are just a few examples that we put together in this resource of the impact of inequality on well-being, but there are many more that we haven't had the space to include, so this is definitely not exhaustive. I'll talk through them. Some of this you'll probably be very aware of, but just in case. So thinking about LGBT discrimination, Stonewall and LGBT Youth Scotland identify inequality as a root cause of homophobia, biphobia and transphobia. 67% of the participants from their education report in 2023 reported experiencing homophobic, biphobic or transphobic bullying during their time in education, so a really, really high number. And then the resulting impact was them feeling less safe, less happy and less content in their education as well. Looking at gender-based violence, and what we'll do is you'll have all the links to all of the reports and all of the references that I'm making, because there'll be a few bits of references to different research and different reports in this slide. So don't worry, we'll make sure you've got them all, so you don't have to just trust me in case I'm making it up. I promise I'm not. So thinking about gender-based violence. So gender-based violence refers to crimes such as rape, domestic abuse, stalking and forced marriage. They're overwhelmingly but not exclusively carried out by men against women. Gender-based violence is a symptom of gender inequality. And research shows that the root cause of gender-based violence is gender inequality, and that levels of violence against women are significantly and consistently higher in societies, communities and relationships where there are more rigid distinctions between the roles of men and women. So just thinking about what that looks like in education, 91% of school-aged girls considered sexual harassment to be a problem at their school. And then a report came out recently that found that 97% of women in the UK have experienced sexual harassment. So really, really high figures in terms of like it being a commonplace experience in education as well. Thinking about racism, the mental health impacts of racism can lead to children, young people and adult learners disengaging entirely from education and feelings of alienation and isolation. Learners from racialized minorities described ways in which they were categorized and seen by other in their education, by accent, by their color of their skin, by faith, by their dress, by their nationality and by their ethnicity as well. And racial slurs were reported as being experienced as a commonplace thing, again, in education by participants to the Insight report from Intercultural Youth Scotland. So, and this can overlap as well. So participants to that report or that piece of research identified that some forms of racism, such as Islamophobia, overlap with sort of maybe anti-immigration sentiments, religious intolerance, and possibly gender stereotypes as well. So all of these things can overlap in terms of what children, young people, and adult learners are experiencing. Thinking a wee bit about poverty, children are more likely to be in poverty across all measures in Scotland compared to adults. Some types of households with children are known to be particularly high risk of experiencing poverty, and these include households with single parents, 3 or more children, where there are disabled household members, where household members are from minority ethnic backgrounds, where there's a child aged under 1 or a mother aged under 25. And again, poverty can overlap and potentially exacerbate all other areas of inequality and be a symptom of another area of inequality as well. Thinking about disability discrimination, the World Health Organization, in collaboration with the World Bank, recently stated that 15% of the world's population, so approximately 1 billion, live with some form of disability. And across the world, disabled people have poorer health outcomes, lower educational achievements, less economic participation, and higher rates of poverty than people who aren't disabled. And this is partly because disabled people experience significant barriers in accessing basic services, including health, education, and employment. And studies have also shown and highlighted that disabled children have poorer experiences of school and lower expectations for themselves in their teen years, and are more likely to experience social isolation as they grow as well. And finally, just thinking about care experience discrimination, discrimination against care experienced children, young people, and adult learners has a significant impact on their mental health. The latest measure of the emotional and behavioural health of looked after children using the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire found that 37% had scores considered as a cause of concern, compared to just 12% of children in the general population. So again, why is that happening? Thinking about sort of the other structures, the other things that are at play that mean that care experienced children, and then laterally young people and adult learners, are facing these barriers that impact their mental health in that way as well. Sorry, that was a lot of information. So thanks, Hannah. I will move on to the next slide. And unfortunately, as I think some of that began to sort of display, inequality can result in a vicious cycle that causes more inequality. So this is because inequality can cause stereotypes and bias, or can be one of the reasons that people are holding on to stereotypes and bias about other people in society, which can then result in increased inequality if opportunities are removed and barriers are put in place for these people. And then all of this can result also in societal violence, like the Allport scale showed, which can again cause further inequality. So it's a harder, it's, you know, that cycle of how it all links up, especially when you add poverty into that picture, and people's ability to sort of access the services that they are entitled to, mean that it can be a real vicious cycle when we look at the impact. So that's the wee snapshot of the impact of inequality. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts that they'd like to share before I hand back to Hannah? If not, I'll hand back to you, Hannah, and feel free to share anything that pops into your mind as we go as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. So the next section here is thinking about talking about diversity, and this section of the framework aims to provide an opportunity to explore some of the different types of human diversity exist in the Scottish context, and we started to talk about that already, and then also to consider the language of diversity and useful approaches to support you to talk about diversity and to take action, and that's really what we're going to be focusing on in today's session. So the first wee bit I'd like us to look at is to think about the challenge of language paralysis. Professor Rowena Arshad uses this term to describe the common feeling of being stuck when we don't know which language to use when we're talking about diversity. And I think this is something we can probably all relate to. Certainly it's something that I've experienced in the past, and I think it happens when we don't feel confident about which language to use to describe diverse groups of people, and we might be worried about embarrassing ourselves, not being aware of the most current terminology, and we might be worried about causing offence for using wrong words to describe a person or a group of people. And these are all normal feelings, considering how language is really complex and constantly evolving, in particular in relation to equalities. I think that's very true. And the caution around outdated language is wise, when some of the outdated language can genuinely cause offence and harm. So, for example, there are terms and expressions that were relatively acceptable in the past, such as like using the word coloured or that's so gay. But today these are no longer acceptable and risk triggering feelings of stress, low self-esteem, anxiety, depression and trauma. Note that the term coloured people has evolved into people of colour, which is often a preferred expression. Outdated and harmful language tends to have a history of inciting violence on marginalised people. And we might think of words that were uttered during the oppression, lynching and burning of certain people based on an aspect of their diverse identity. Unfortunately, much of those histories will have a lasting impact today. And those same words being uttered can cause a person to hide or even hate one aspect of their identity, whether they're hiding their gender identity, their religion, their language, the colour of their skin, their disability and more. So thinking now a wee bit about making mistakes when engaging in dialogue about equalities work and when working to be more accessible and inclusive. And I think this is a really important conversation to have when you're sort of doing work in your setting around equalities and sort of thinking about how we can create spaces that feel safe for people to make mistakes, but at the same time that allow people to hold themselves and others accountable for these mistakes as well. I think that sometimes making mistakes when we're talking about equality and when we're trying to adopt a more kind of diverse language can feel very costly because in particular because we live in a cancel culture. It makes it feel as though genuine mistakes are responded to in the same way as intentional harmful language and action. But I think that we can create spaces where it is safe to explore this, whilst also holding on to that kind of respect of others as well. So when engaging in this work, it's really important to remember that developing language that is respectful and inclusive is a skill, and it requires time and practice and research. So instead of feeling defensive or embarrassed when someone points out that we use the wrong language or harmful terminology, it's more effective to remain curious, humble and open, adopting a growth mindset, whereby making mistakes and learning to grow from them is the way forward. So when we do make a mistake, best thing we can do is apologise, do our best to listen and learn from the mistake so that we don't keep repeating it, and keep learning, talking about and taking action on the issues. And I think this is the most crucial point, that it's really important to ensure that our own feelings of perhaps shame or embarrassment don't silence us and prevent us from engaging in the work moving forward. So at the same time as all this, new words are emerging all the time to help us better understand diversity. So terms that might seem unfamiliar at first can often become commonplace, and it's best to sort of remain open to this new terminology and then try to learn the reasons for the language changing. So for example, the term cisgender and neurotypical are relatively new, emerging in the 1990s. The word cisgender, as I'm sure many of you will know, describes people whose sense of gender identity corresponds to the sex they were assigned at birth. And neurotypical describes people who are not autistic or don't display any other neurologically diverse patterns of thought or behaviour. So just invite you to share in the chat pane as I continue to talk, just any other examples of relatively new terminology in relation to equalities work. At the same time, some older terminology that might have been offensive in the past has been reclaimed by empowered people who have historically been marginalised. And an example of this would be the term queer, which has a history of being used as an insult, but is now generally accepted as an inclusive umbrella term for the spectrum of sexual and gender identities under the acronym LGBT+. So I won't ask you to share any of these reclaimed words in the chat pane, as I think we always have to be cautious around who is using them. The meaning of the word can vary depending on whether it's used by people within that particular community or someone out with it. So this is always something worth considering when examining our language in relation to equalities. I'm just going to pass back to Amy, but allow any kind of reflections on that kind of section on language, growth of language and language paralysis. If that's something that you've experienced or you can relate to, do welcome you sharing any kind of thoughts or ideas. Stuart, you're saying challenging behaviour now, distressed behaviour preferred by young people. I wasn't aware of that. Thank you for sharing. So instead of using the term challenging behaviour, distressed behaviour is the terminology. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
think it's really good to open up the discussion about language and terminology. I think I've definitely been in that place where you've described that you feel like you don't really know what to say and feel a bit stuck sometimes, and just worried that you're going to say the wrong thing. And I've definitely felt like that so many times. So I think by having these resources available, hopefully, again, it's something that can help people to have these discussions within their own settings with staff and colleagues and volunteers and learners, just, you know, to kind of explore it together. I think it's great to have these resources like openly available to be able to help us to do that.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. I mean, I think it's certainly anyone that's worked in the sort of done any form of equalities work or has led this in their own settings, I think will be really familiar with these feelings. It's certainly something that I can relate to, that kind of feeling of just being concerned of like causing offence, and actually that ends up making you sort of not progress with the work, or being afraid to kind of have discussions with people. And I think that can be really can really sort of prevent sort of good work from going forward. So it is important to create a space to talk about that. And even I think it's worthwhile in your own settings to consider how would people like to be held accountable? How can we have those conversations, and what would that look like? And even kind of practicing those so that it feels a bit safer, and like people aren't kind of feeling like they're the ones that have to hold people to account, or when someone is being kind of held to account because they've used the wrong language, what's the sort of like the most effective way to do that? I think as well. So it's always worth having those conversations. And if that's, you know, something that you would like to have more of a chat about, like how those conversations can be held, then I'm happy to have that conversation with anyone. So just feel free to contact myself or Amy as well. And we've got some other reflections in the chat. Pauline, you're saying reclaimed language is important to recognise that words are generally used acceptable by members of that particular community in relation to themselves. Yeah, not always the case, but certainly I think when we do see those reclaimed words, it's best to kind of hold back and see what context it's acceptable to use them in. We've got gender fluid is becoming more popular. Emotionally based school avoidant, a new term for school refuser or refusing. Hard to reach groups is easy to ignore. That's a good one. Yeah, I think that's because that then, if we say hard to reach, it puts the responsibility on the group as opposed to you to be the one that's trying to engage them. If I wasn't sure, I'd ask. Most of the time people just want to be heard and accepted in their own community. Yeah, I think there is something around how do we ask what the right sort of language is as well. Anybody else got any other reflections just now? I'm just going to pass on to Amy then.
Thanks, Hannah, and thanks so much everybody for sharing your thoughts and expertise in the chat pane. I definitely learned a lot from reading what everybody was saying there, and it's definitely the language can change your perspective. Like with easy to ignore or distressed, emotionally distressed, it absolutely can change your perspective, which will then change your actions or the actions of folk around you. So yeah, thank you very much for sharing that. So what we're going to do now is I'll talk through the fourth and final wee nugget from the Inclusion, Wellbeing and Equalities Professional Learning Framework. And then we'll have time to stop and have conversations in breakout rooms. And we're slightly ahead of time, which never happens, and I'm like, wow, I don't know what to do when this happens. This is why I'm obviously chitter-chattering too much, but so that should give us lots of time. If I don't take it all up now, should give us lots of time to have those breakout discussions in a wee moment. So the final bit that we're going to talk through today is diversity in the curriculum, mirrors and windows. And this session aims to provide an opportunity to consider the importance of embedding diversity and equalities in the curriculum, and to explore a practical and hopefully simple approach, which is mirrors and windows, to embedding diversity in the curriculum as well. Thanks, Hannah. So Scotland's curriculum is not restricted to curriculum areas and subjects. It isn't restricted to what is taught and happens in a classroom, and it also includes opportunities for personal achievement, interdisciplinary learning, and the ethos and life of the learning setting. It's designed to be a coherent, flexible and enriched curriculum that is adaptable and responsive to the diverse needs of individual learners and which reflects the uniqueness of their communities. It's important that all learners are represented, see themselves in the curriculum and recognise that it is relevant to them. And as you know, in CLD, learning is developed with learners responding to their goals and their aspirations. So as such, everyone who is supporting children, young people and adults, families and communities to learn can contribute to embedding diversity and equalities in learning programmes. Thanks, Hannah. So in this part of the session, we're using the term curriculum to refer to the content of a learning programme, acknowledging that this curriculum will be constructed by learners and by practitioners. So thinking about when diversity is lacking in the curriculum or lacking in learning, some of the impacts of this are missing perspectives. So the curriculum is incomplete and inaccurate. Knowledge is shared from a monocultural, monolinguistic, narrow perspective of the world. The dominant perspective, which is often white, male, middle class, cisgendered, heterosexual, able-bodied, neurotypical, English-speaking, Christian, for example, all of that seen as normal and everything else is considered as other, sitting outside. And that as a result, learners can or might put a lot of effort to fit into this narrow norm. And this often means spending a lot of time masking their diversity. So pretending to be neurotypical, for example, or pretending they don't speak another language other than English, hiding their religion, home, culture, or food, changing their name and accent, and pretending they don't experience or provide care, or pretending they aren't experiencing poverty as well, just as some examples there. Diverse learners also risk internalizing stereotypes and negative messages about themselves that limit their potential and their aspirations. So this might be choosing career paths based on gender, race, social class, etc., believing they can't do well in a certain subject because of their diverse identity. All of these things could begin to show in a way a child, young person, or adult learner was engaging with education. Every learner then risks absorbing biases and prejudiced ideas that exist in a curriculum that lacks diversity. So believing stereotypes about certain groups that don't share the same identities as them, and developing unconscious implicit bias that Hannah talked us through about girls, for example, or LGBT people or Black people, examples there. As a result of prejudiced ideas and narrow perspectives on diverse people, learners have less empathy and might be have less of an understanding of the lives and perspectives of diverse people as well. And this can result in an increase in discrimination and bullying. Before we move on to the next slide, does anybody have anything they'd like to share around what they've seen when diversity is lacking in learning? Either in the chat pane or by popping your hand up. If not, I will keep going, but again, please feel free to jump in if you fancy as we go. Thank you, Hannah. So in terms of a tool we can use to increase diversity in learning, we've got the mirrors and windows example. So African-American scholar Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop coined the term mirrors and windows in her 1990 essay on multicultural literacy. In her essay, Dr. Bishop explains that children need to see themselves in books, otherwise they learn a powerful lesson about how they are devalued by society. She also argues that books can serve as windows to give readers a glimpse into the lives and experiences of others. So the concept of mirrors and windows has become a useful practical approach to embed diversity and equalities in a curriculum. While Dr. Bishop's essay focuses on multicultural literacy in books, the concept of mirrors and windows can extend out to all aspects of curriculum and learning, such as the wider ethos and life in a learning setting. I'm just having a wee looking at the chat pane. Yeah, absolutely, learning is limited. We're not providing the breadth and opportunity that we could. That's a really good point. And then, yeah, thank you, that learners might just disengage from certain things and then have a really narrow pathway that they're following. And definitely true of schools too. Yeah, definitely across the board. Thanks, Hannah. So thinking a wee bit first about mirrors, where learners might see themselves. Mirrors can help develop a positive self-image and sense of identity, which increases confidence, self-esteem, and general well-being. Folk might feel seen, better understood, and safer when there's good mirrors in education. It should also hopefully reduce feelings of shame, of exclusion, and of needing to mask diverse identities to be accepted, and decrease the internalization of negative stereotypes and biases about themselves. It can also provide the opportunity to learn about our own rights and freedoms. For example, with the Equality Act, the United Nations Conventions for the Rights of the Child, and broader human rights as well. And then it can allow people the space and the opportunity to be their true selves. Mirrors have the potential to be included in every aspect of the curriculum and the totality of the learner's experiences. For example, in posters, books, stories, media, role models, historical figures, the staff or practitioners that they're engaging with, and more. And the more it can be naturally included across all areas of the curriculum, instead of sort of slotted into one area, the better as well. Thanks, Hannah. Thinking now about windows, so learning about and normalizing diversity. Windows can help learners to learn about the experiences and perspectives of different people, understand and normalize diversity and difference, build empathy and a shared sense of humanity, respect the rights and freedoms of others, identify and challenge stereotypes, prejudice, discrimination, and bullying. And windows also have the potential to be included in every aspect of the curriculum again. So just across everything that we're doing, we could be thinking, where are there opportunities for windows for us to build in as well? Thanks, Anna. So a wee note of caution, some mirrors and windows in the curriculum can contain outdated representations and negative stereotypes. And when diverse representation is provided, but it could have a negative impact on learners' perceptions of themselves or others. These can be described as distorted mirrors and windows. If those representations go unchallenged and learners are not encouraged to think critically around what might be wrong or missing in those representations, distorted mirrors and windows can be harmful for all learners. So diverse learners might internalize negative and limiting messages about themselves. Other learners might absorb biases and prejudice notions about a diverse group of people. And if they act upon those biases, they might discriminate and engage in other harmful behaviours, possibly thinking about that Allport scale again, that sort of bottom two layers of antilocution and avoidance. That could be those harmful behaviours that are beginning to show if we have distorted mirrors and windows. And again, as thinking about Hannah's overview of bias, that could either be conscious or unconsciously done by folk, or intentional or unintentional. So to avoid this, it is best to include more and a wider variety of mirrors and windows, and this can reduce the risk of tokenism, othering, and stereotyping. Moreover, encouraging learners to think critically about, or more critically about, the representations they can see can help address distorted mirrors and windows. And on the resource, we've got a few sort of additional links that might be really helpful for thinking about that critical thinking around distorted mirrors and windows, which is useful for us all to do, to think about why that messaging might be there, who's not included, who is included. So we can, I'll link to them here, but we can also make sure you have the links to everything as well. Will I link to them? Is it letting me copy it? Here we go. So this is just if you were hoping to explore a bit more about responses to distorted mirrors and windows, because that's something that I've seen more and more. I feel like in media, these conversations, they don't say distorted mirrors and windows, but examples of stereotyping and in resources that are used in education as well. So thanks very much, Hannah. If we're happy to move on to the next slide, we can sail into the breakout room discussions. And we've got quite a wee chunk of time, which is nice. So you can hopefully spend some time really exploring some of the questions that we've posed for the breakout rooms. So we've got the questions around what you've learned so far, or what you think about it. So how this has made you feel, what this has made you think about, and what one action that you would like to take forward is. And then sort of related to that one action that you'd like to take forward, we were going to have two sort of additional questions around how you might want to sort of link with others in your work around this, and how you'll know whether that learning is making a difference or not. I suppose are two additional questions for that third one. So we'll make sure I'll post them all in the chat pane, and we can make sure that they're in your breakout rooms as well. And then thanks. Thank you, Hannah. I tried to post it anyway, and it came up as like weirdly highlighted, so you've saved me from that. And then later on, we'll come in and we can post this, so you've not got too much to think about at once. We might ask how you might use the Inclusion, Wellbeing and Equalities Professional Learning Framework in your setting. So if you're happy to jump into breakout rooms, we'll get you to think about the number one first, and have a sort of a general chat about how this has made you feel and what's made you think about and what you'd like to take forward. And then we'll come in and we'll post that second question for you to think about when you're in your breakout rooms. Does that sound okay to everybody? Is that clear enough?
How long have we got, Amy?
Oh, sorry, that would be helpful, wouldn't it? Right, you're asking me to do some quick maths because we're ahead of time. So I'm like, wait, how long do we have? If folk are happy to come back at 3, it's 3:20. Okay, does that sound reasonable? Does that sound like it's giving folk enough time? And that gives us, 5 minutes to talk at the end and to do the evaluation as well. Well, 10 minutes, but 5 for each, if that's okay. So if folk are happy to come back at 20 past, that would be great.
Thanks so much, Amy. I'm just opening the rooms now, so
hopefully,
you. As if by magic, people will virtually land in a breakout room. Thanks so much. If everyone's made it back, that would be great. Although we've only got okay, the numbers are going up again, so that's brilliant. Hopefully everyone makes it back and had some great discussion in their breakout rooms. It's always good to connect up with others. I will double check that people are coming back in. I see we've got 23 people back, but we did have, I think we had 32. So hopefully we haven't lost 10 people in the virtual world somewhere. Let me just double check. I think that should be us. Wondering if anyone in the groups would like to share any kind of thoughts or any of the kind of key discussion points that you had within your rooms around the session today, and what you think you'd maybe take forward, and perhaps utilising some of the resource that's newly online. Pamela, in you come.
Hi, thanks. I think we had a conversation around about the resource, and unfortunately we didn't really get. I'll be upfront and honest. I openly said I didn't get the chance to read it and look at it really to make a decision. But certainly, what we were going to try and do is test it out with our team first, and then potentially take extracts from it to kind of get our CLD partnership to start thinking about it. As we move on to reiterating our next CLD plan.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Thank you. And what we've shared today, and the bits that Amy and Hannah went through, that's just a small kind of highlights piece on everything that is in that resource site. So yeah, definitely take some time to become familiar with it, and we'd be really keen to hear about how sharing it with colleagues go. If there's things you think is missing, or any kind of feedback like that is all really helpful. So yeah, great to hear that. I'm wondering if anyone else wants to share. Feel free to pop your hand up or pop anything in the chat. I've just put the link there to the resource site in the chat there as well, but I'll send it all out in one email afterwards. John, in you come.
Just I was in the same group as Pamela, so when I went in, I suppose on the first question, we talked quite a lot, didn't we, about the trusted the list exercise. Found that really quite interesting. I think all of us made us really reflect on our kind of trusted list. Some of us found it hard if we weren't including family members, but we're reflecting whether that was colleagues or friends and so on. We also looked a bit at the mirrors and windows and that was really interesting. I suppose we were reflecting a bit on CLD approaches, and I suppose you think of a CLD approach being based on where learners are at, and so, you know, hopefully when putting together the curriculum, if you like, or the learning content, it should be based on where people are at, and we also talked about where that feeds into sort of supporting community involvement and listening to voices, and so that is part of our thinking, but important not to be complacent about that and to challenge ourselves on it.
Yeah, that's so interesting, John. Thank you. We had some chat in our group about that activity around the trusted people as well, and talking about around age differences and generational differences in terms of language that people of a certain age might be quite comfortable using, and likewise other way around. Yvonne, in you come.
Yeah, just following on from you, yeah, the discussion that we had was about how terminology and discussions of different age groups need to be mindful of what was acceptable, what is acceptable, and trying to get other age groups to understand why people use different terminologies. It's not maybe wrong, it's just relearning things, and the understanding it needs to be embedded across the generations.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. And I think there's lots that we could all talk about into the cold afternoon and evening, but we'll probably take a moment there to wrap up. You'll be really pleased to know that in CLD fashion, we've actually got 2 evaluations. We have one evaluation on your screen and in the chat, which is the evaluation of this session. And then afterwards, we'll share an evaluation of the resource more broadly, which the Equalities team will be really keen to hear back from yourselves, not even necessarily today, it'll be open until March in terms of that second one. Hannah, in you come.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. Just to say in relation to that feedback as well, if people are wanting to go away and have a wee look at the full slide decks and sort of facilitation notes, and even have a shot of one of them, and once you've sort of like had a go of it, happy to, it might feel better to provide feedback at that point because you'll be more familiar with it, but also equally happy to take feedback on the sort of general themes of the resources today. So just whatever works best for you there. Thanks.
Brilliant, thank you so much. So the QR code on your screen or the link in the chat will take you to the same evaluation form for today's session, and that should be the standard kind of winter learning form that will pop up. And yeah, thank you so much for your participation in this session. We have 2 more sessions as part of our Winter Learning Festival week. So on Wednesday, we have an introduction to racial literacy, which our colleague Laura is facilitating. And on Thursday, we have our HMI colleague Sheila Brown doing a session on Quality Indicator 1.2, which is around an equalities focus. So yeah, I'm going to wrap up there because I could talk on forever, but thank you very much for coming along. We'll share all of the information, the presentation, the links to the resource, and all of the kind of feedback and evaluations in. I'll send out one email this evening with all of that in it, all contained together. So yeah, thanks so much. We really welcome any feedback on today's session and anything for the future. So yeah, please keep in touch.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Can I just say a huge thank you to everyone for coming and for contributing in the discussions and the great chat in my breakout room, and I know that happened across all the different breakout rooms. We really appreciate it. And just to say again, if it's okay with you, Julie, to pop our contact details into that email, and if anybody wants to have a chat about embedding this work moving forward, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. So thanks very much, everyone.